Hello, Xenia. Welcome to the Awaken and Align podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I feel like I know you and I've known you for a while, but we've never met in person. Even though we live like probably 40 miles away from each other, but I really feel, I don't know, through Instagram, through the magic of the internet, I feel like, I know your energy and I know who you are. So I'm so glad that you're finally here sharing your story.
Yeah, I think that as an Aquarius rising, I also do feel like I know everyone from the internet. But yeah, I also appreciate you saying that because I think that when we let ourselves be known through what we share, then we can actually feel like connected. So I'm so glad that we are here.
Yeah, my moon and Venus in Aquarius are right there on your ascendant. So hi. We vibed over the interwebs. I would like to start with your origin story, actually. Like, where did you grow up? I know you're Filipina, right? Not Filipino. The
Yeah,
feminine.
Filipina, whatever you want to say.
Share your story, darling.
Okay, so I am a first generation immigrant. I was born in the Philippines, but both of my younger sisters, who are really close in age to me, were born in New Jersey. And so I am like just barely a first generation immigrant. And I like to say I grew up at the mall because I did. I grew up in the 80s and early 90s in a suburb surrounded by malls. And I had,
Spencer's.
what's that?
Spencer's? Did you
Oh yeah, totally. Spencer's, Claire's, Sunglass Hut. But like, I think I like to say that because I've been living in New York City for my whole adult life since I was 18. And I like that I came from the suburbs because in this weird way, I feel like I straddle many different root systems because of this background. And I think that what's really interesting is I grew up in a school where there were 2,000 kids in the high school. So even though I was in a suburb, there was this feeling that no matter what you're into, no matter who you are, you can find someone to get along with. You can find people who are like you and like-minded. So I feel like my whole life, I've always been socially dipping my toes in many different groups of people. And that has also informed the way I move in the world as an adult. When I moved to New York from the suburbs, I came here for college and it was 1 or 2 weeks before 9/11. And I didn't know that this was like an abnormal thing because I just moved to the city and I didn't understand the difference between that time and what it's normally like here. So that really informed a lot about just who I am as an adult, like growing up in the chaos or becoming an adult in the chaos of that. But in that time, I managed to, and this kind of connects to other things I'll probably talk about, I managed to land in the fashion industry totally by accident through actually a babysitting job and a family that I really loved. And so I worked as a fashion writer. And then I got offered a job as a fashion buyer at a shoe store with no experience. I got hired off the sales floor. And most of my career has been a hodgepodge of me working for people doing things I admire who are really tiny companies, 1 or 2 people. Or I also worked for an online fashion magazine in like 2003. And people were like, what's an online fashion magazine? Like we had to explain to people what it was. There was no other content out there. I think it was us, Refinery 29, and maybe like one other that we knew of. So I grew up or became an adult really in a way when things were being invented. So what you would learn one year would be like completely irrelevant the next year. And that magazine went out of business right when the internet started booming, actually. So I guess I really consider myself like a multidisciplinary writer. And after I had careers working in vintage shops and managing restaurants and just kind of being very hyper local with my work, I ended up opening my own brick and mortar shop in 2015. And during that time, I went through what I don't, it's so corny, but I don't have better words for it, like my big spiritual awakening. And so everything about what I cared about when I started that business was totally different. So we went from being this like affordable fashion store into being really a community space and like kind of like your entryway, that safe entryway into spiritual work. So that's like the long and short story.
Wow, that was really concise.
Well, there's a lot more I could say.
But was there something that you really dreamt of doing when you were a kid or even going to school? Like, was it always the writer or did you have other aspirations?
That's a really hard question because I wrote furiously for most of my life. I took like screenwriting, poetry, like children's book writing, playwriting, like any kind of writing you would see me like doing. That's something, actually my North Node and my Venus and my Moon are in Gemini. So it's like, I don't even have to think about it. Like I have to write. But I also, when I was in first grade, remember wanting to be the president and wanting to be a pop star. And I still think I'd want to kind of do a different version of both of those things.
Like, if you run, I would vote for you and I would probably go on the campaign trail with you.
Well, I no longer want to do that because I now realize it is like the worst job.
Worstjob.com.
The worst job. I thought the skill set was caring about the collective. I thought the skill set was like inspiring and innovating. It turns out to be all about really a lot of power games and testing well in focus groups, which is my literal nightmare.
And also you're a woman of color. So I hope that we get to a point where we can get there, but apparently America likes old white men. So sorry to interrupt you.
We're gonna get there, and we're gonna get there so fast. Like, I feel like this conversation in 10 years, we're gonna be like, I can't even believe we even worried about this, because I just feel like we're right there.
We're so close.
We're so close.
Don't you feel like, sorry to go off on a tangent, I tend to do this. Don't you feel like 2020 to 2021, we were so close on so many things? Like, oh, we were so close. But
I'm like really glad you brought this up, because I've been thinking about this a lot personally and as a collective. And like, I am someone who has a lot of appreciation for like very grounded, practical people, very like material realm people. I was raised by them. I only worked in that way for most of my life. And I really feel like on an energetic collective level, and I'm sure this is reflected astrologically, that 2020, it's like, you know, when something is about to shift in your life and everything that needs to leave needs to get kind of like brought up into your consciousness so that you can see what needs to change, what needs to move, why things, like what you really want and what you're willing to do to get there. I feel like we had that as a collective. You know, I think that's why so many people didn't go back to work, and they're calling it a labor shortage. It's because people had a moment to be like, what really matters when I'm not sure what's going to happen tomorrow. And like early 2020 was like that, you know, we were like, I think some of us thought it was going to be a 2-week deal, right? Like, we're going to just all be quiet and behave ourselves for 2 weeks.
2 years later.
Yeah, it's like a collective consciousness shift. Yeah,
and I think it's in one of the last chapters of the 4 Agreements, which I'm obsessed with that book, where the author, is it Don Ruiz, I think, says in order for change to happen, you have to go through a period of awareness, because you cannot change what you do not know. And I think that's what shadow is, and shadow work is thrown around a lot these days, is just being aware of what you don't see and what you don't know. It's not necessarily that it's bad or that it's deep or that it's, I say bad in quotes too, because what is bad, right? It's just something you don't know and you're not aware of. So how could you possibly change it? And in order for us to get that awareness is to sit still in the present moment and allow ourselves to take in everything that's going on at the present moment. And I think that's what 2020 was. Anyway, sorry, continue.
No, that I'm so like, I really think it reminds me of this analogy of this spiral staircase and how healing when you're on the spiral staircase, when you get to like the seventh step or something, you can't see where you came from. You don't remember where it is, but you don't yet see where you're going. And I forgot who invented that or came up with that, but I think it's uncomfortable because I personally relate to this idea of now being acutely aware of how I get in my own way and not yet fully formed into the new habits that need to come into form for me to truly transform on some kind of deep level. So that awareness time, I think a lot of times we think that's it. Like once we know what it is, then it will shift. But I think there's also this like uncomfortable, biological, energetic transformation where you're like kind of trying to catch up with yourself. I like this idea that like our bodies are slower than like our energy.
Yes.
They need more time. And I think that that's where a lot of us are, where we're kind of like, I know I'm changing and I know I'm growing, but what needs to happen and why am I dragging my feet on this? And it's like, it's difficult because I think that a lot of us need to mourn and grieve for things that we have demonized in ourselves, but served a purpose, like what you were talking about with the shadow. It's like, I was just talking to someone about my tendency to people please, and I know why I do that or why I have done that. It's because I learned it as a technique to keep myself emotionally shielded from other people throwing their anger at me. I'm adept at it, but I think before we can let something go, we have to like appreciate it and like thank it for what it does for us. And I think especially on the Instagram spiritual sphere, there's a lot of just like, I'm done this and I'm done with this part of me. Or I remember when I like the corporate muggle me and like kind of sending like hatred, across the time space continuum at this like former version of ourselves that was like just doing what they knew how to do, So I feel like we're at this funky part in 2020 where the collective consciousness is changing, but it's like the collective energetic puberty. It's like awkward.
Oh my God. I can almost feel what you're going to say before you say that, if that makes sense. And it's probably my human design, but what you said is so healing to me. It feels like a healing balm because I'm a Sag rising. I'm ruled by Jupiter. And I was just talking about this with my mom, when I go through heartbreak or any kind of trauma, as a trauma response, I'll like spend all of my money on partying and drinking and drugs and travel the world and kind of try to run away from my problems. And that's just what I knew how to do at the time because I didn't have coping mechanisms that weren't self-destructive. I was literally that girl swinging from the chandeliers, popping bottles. And a really long time, I felt so guilty about that. And I felt so like low vibrational Sagittarius, like what the hell? What was that? I don't remember parts of it because, I would black out. But now looking at it with compassionate eyes and saying like, you did the best that you could with the resources that you were given, being raised by people who are also traumatized and hurt, who couldn't hold space for you. I think, oh my gosh, it's such a beautiful way to see it. So
I felt that same way. I was bartending and spent a lot of my life in bars, and I like was very tempted, and I did shame like this version of myself for a very long time. I think my coping mechanism, I don't know where this comes from, but it's workaholism. I just try to work. And people think of that as it's much more societally acceptable to be a workaholic than like an alcoholic, I guess. But like it really stems from the same thing, which is self-abandonment, which comes from pain. And so the question, or the compassionate question, is why are so many of us in so much pain? And how do we allow ourselves to really honor that the human experience can be really like, I think it's like AP class for spirit, you know, for your spirit. You want to go down there? You want to do some next level stuff? Try being human. Try it out. And without the victim consciousness, you know what I mean? It's like I can appreciate how difficult things are and be grateful for them at the same time. And I cannot skip any of it. I cannot, like, I was thinking about this right before our call. Like, we all talk about spiritual bypassing, you know, and this idea that you will use your spirituality to bypass what is difficult. You will use it as an escape hatch. But I actually think that there are many forms of bypassing besides spiritual bypassing. I think there's material bypassing, when you just want to live in the material world and you know and you can sense there's a bigger lesson or a bigger part of something, but you ignore it because you're more comfortable in the material world. Or maybe you're like very comfortable in the emotional realm and you feel ruled by your feelings and you want to skip over any form of rational thought or reason. You know, like there's many ways to bypass what a holographic being we all are. And spiritual bypassing is just one of them. So I just like to think about how in any moment, like there's so much going on in our experience and so much to learn from, that just like giving ourselves some credit for being here.
Being
like,
alive.
Yeah, like how did we even get here? No, but I'm serious. I read a lot of science books because I don't know, like Aquarius rising nerd, like our the prevailing theory about how we are here is that, you know, 13.8 billion years ago or something, I have to check that number, an event happened and all of the observable universe appeared. And that's what science tells us. So even if you're just a material person, it's kind of a confusing, chaotic miracle that we are held together in time and space, interfacing with each other, you know? So it's like some compassion for like every day of your life you walk through the unknown, raised by people and surrounded by people who also are basically living in the unknown.
I love that. When you were speaking about like, why do we feel so much pain? I was watching a clip of Andrew Garfield on, I don't know if you know who he is. He's an actor. He played Spider-Man, but he just played Jonathan Larson on a Netflix movie called Tick, Tick, Boom. And Jonathan Larson was the creator of Rent, which I've watched Rent I watched the original cast when it came out when I was like in high school, and my favorite Broadway show of all time. Anyway, he the day that Rent opened, he passed away at the age of 35. And this movie is all about his trying to write a successful show during his Saturn return, and him feeling like he's running out of time. Tick, tick, boom, very Saturnian. So Andrew Garfield plays him in this movie, and at the same time he's playing him, he loses his mother. So he was sharing with Stephen Colbert, and it's such an emotional like talk, and just watching a cisgender white man showing emotion like that made me cry, because I was like, there's hope. But he was saying that grief is unexpressed love, and he wants to feel the grief because it just shows me the depth at which I can love and that I have more of it. And I was like, what? It was just such a beautiful
let's just take a moment for that.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm crying in my own Aries way. Because how much shit have we collectively gone through? So much loss, so much trauma just in this last 2 years, let alone like you talked about 9/11. I don't think I even still processed that whole shit.
Yeah.
But collectively all the grief that we've been going through, and then our own personal grief, and that piercing heart breaking is our capacity to love. And as humans, like that is what we are. We're just like big love bombs, needing love, wanting to be seen, wanting to be heard. And I think what you just explained is like the beauty of humanity, that we do have feelings.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
no question there, just statements.
Yeah, I love that. I'm so glad you shared that, because that's like, I think that's what we're scared of, is that we're actually really tender and we're actually really beautiful. And there's like so much to, like, there's so much pain to witness and there's so much beauty to witness. And it's the same eyes, like the same vision that sees and feels both, which is essentially like having an open heart and not getting stuck in your mind. But like, I was writing about this a couple of weeks ago, but like, I think about the things I get ashamed about the most, like on real talk level, right? So one thing about me is when I get nervous, my hands have always sweat, like wildly, like not like normal. Like I'm like, what's happening to me? If I think about it, this happens. And on a base level, what that means to me is I'm ashamed of my body, right? And what is being human? It's having a body that just does what it does. So there's like, I'm ashamed of having a body. I'm ashamed when I have a feeling that I didn't anticipate, right? Like if I get jealous or if I get nervous, I feel like, well, you shouldn't be nervous. So I'm ashamed of having feelings, and having feelings is being human. So that's another way we're taught to just be ashamed because we're human. And then the idea of not knowing like what to do next or not being sure, which I also think is just part of being human, because there's no way you can know like what you're heading into or what even the person across from you is like really feeling and going through. Like we're always kind of best guessing. It's like such a brave, vulnerable thing to be a human being. And I think all three of those things we're taught to feel so much shame. I can't speak for everyone, but for me, I do. And I feel like I got something wrong, or I don't know the answer, or, you know, my body's doing something I don't think it's supposed to be doing. I feel shame. And I'm like, this is the gig. This is the gig, you know, like, why am I supposed to feel so bad about being an animal and a spirit and a body with feelings? Like that's confusing to me. And I work a lot with little children, and I have 2 nieces and 2 nephews, and like that's the thing I really think about the most is like, I don't want them to be ashamed that they're human.
Yeah.
You know, like, you feel sad, okay, you feel sad. Like you're so excited you want to scream but you're not supposed to scream, like you're 2, like,
or
let
angry.
it out.
Yeah. People always say that I sound angry, and I'm like, well, I can be angry and also I'm just passionate. But I think people are so afraid of anger as if it's a bad thing, and I'm like, anger is an emotion to catalyze us into change. So I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, and also like anger lets you know where your boundaries are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like sometimes you don't know and then you're like, oh, I'm mad about this thing. Why? It's like, oh, because that doesn't work for me. You
Yeah.
know, I
Yes.
have a lot of fear of anger. I have to say it's the biggest thing that takes me a long time to kind of really like see what it's trying to tell me and like appreciate it in other people too.
Mm.
So
Oh, I'll teach you something. I'm like, I feel like I'm angry all the time. Just kidding. But
teach
not kidding.
me, teach me.
Well, I just get annoyed a lot by people and like their incompetence and how they just don't care about people. But we can segue into that conversation later. I think one thing that you said reminded me, because I am a very future forward thinker and I really try not to look back, but I do want to share with people who are listening to this that after I quit my corporate job in 2017, I worked in private equity, and then I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do. I got rid of my apartment. I sold all of my material things, like really like, got rid of my material like basis of security. And I just really wanted to travel and explore this world. And for those, well, even now, people don't think I have a real job, which is whatever, another story for another time. But there were like times when people would ask me, like, what do you do? And what are you doing? And it would trigger me so much because I really didn't fucking know. Like, I didn't know what I wanted to do, who I wanted to be. I didn't even know who I was. And I felt this pressure to say something, especially coming from an Asian culture where everybody and their mom is like a doctor or a lawyer or a nurse or something like really prestigious. And here I was like, I don't know.
Yeah. Like, that's the thing though, is like, you probably notice this in your community too. Do you notice that like people always ask about life purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they generally have a concept that their life purpose has to do with how they're going to earn money in the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's not that I don't like agree with that. I think sometimes the best way that we're meant to exchange and contribute and share is like how we were designed, because there's a reason I'm not, like an engineer. Like, maybe I could do it, but it might be harder for me than someone else. And what is so interesting is, so like this, I was working on this book project. I'm getting ready to put it out. It's called The Universe is an Art Project. The reason it's called that is because whenever I'm tripping out about getting things wrong, I remember that everything is made up. And I don't mean that in this callous way of like, do whatever you want, it doesn't even matter. I don't mean it that way at all. But what I do mean to say is that the right way to do things, even like some of the most ancient ideas and texts, flowed through some human vessel somewhere, right? Someone's divine creative spark. And so like, I feel like in those moments when you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, like, don't ask me. It's like that moment where you're just shading that spark, and what it is not yet in the field where you can say, that's what I'm doing. Like, you can't point to an energetic template that's there and refer to it, because you are inventing it through your beingness, through your life, and like, it's sad because the first thing we do ask each other is like about what our work is. And for many years, I was embarrassed to see my friends from high school because I was like a total, I don't want to say, I was like in every club. I was like the vice president of this or that. I was voted like most likely to succeed. Like, I did really well when I was told what to do. Like, tell me what to do and I'll do it. And I'll look for your approval and I'll just keep doing it. And that's not what life is. And in many ways, I actually get angry at the education system, because I'm like, you're not teaching people how to decide where to point their arrow or what their inner compass is. And then that's actually all they really need, is to know where they want to go.
Yes.
And so like, I feel like I could say here all day, like, you aren't your job, like, it doesn't matter, like, status doesn't matter. But I know what that feels like, to be like a little like, in my head, I know I'm this like infinite being of love, but my body is saying, oh my gosh, just say something so they can understand you and know where to file you in the filing cabinet of their mind. And like, that's why I love kind of the internet and also our community, is because so many of the times we just end up working with people because we like them. It's not, what can you do for me? What am I going to do for you? It's just like over creative, like our creative flames are joining and making this other flame, and like, let's share it. And I love that we can work in that way. Totally. And you remind me that the reason I think I started in fashion, even though I never wanted to be in fashion when I was like younger, is because it was the one thing in my life where I was like, this is made up. Like, people would be like, what are you wearing? And I'd be like, I'm wearing oven mitts. When I was like 12. would just do wacky things because I was like, who cares? Like, it's made up. And then when I was like working in the shoe store in New York, and this grown person would come to me with their 2 children and be like, can I wear denim with gray? And I would be like, you do whatever you want. You raise these 2 kids, like, you're super capable. Like, just reminding people, like, these rules and this fear, it's very real in our body, but in actuality, it's residual. It's like, it's made up.
Yeah. And what I was saying to you before we hit record is I don't like the idea of a niche. And I actually reject that very much because, like, I say this in every fucking episode, I feel, I'm so sorry, but we are multidimensional infinite beings. And I want to experience everything that this life has to offer. So I was even telling my mom this morning, I feel like what I want to do and all the things I want to do aren't fit in this current paradigm of like, you have to tell people what you are from one title. Even putting something on my Instagram bio, I'm like, fuck, I have to like put something.
Oh my God.
I like everything.
I totally understand. It's so hard to explain who you are.
Yeah.
And like, I think it's like a compassionate thing to do because people just want the long and the short of things. They just want to understand like the bullet points or the essence. They want you to do like your best kind of, I always think of it like this, like you have 10 Legos, but like make it look like this holographic, like trippy, iridescent thing, like, but make it with the Legos. And so I think it's like a courtesy that we all do to each other, that we shortcut these things and we try to explain. But I think when our value, like, and it becomes like when our value or like our identity, like this is what I am, gets attached to it, that's when it gets, I don't know, kind of dangerous. Like when I had a shop, I felt like I need to know everything about shops and I need to like know about all the things in the business world and all the brands. And I need to like go all up and down the street and learn about all the other stores. And I was like I like forgot about, 90% of myself. That's totally something else. And I think that's like what we're taught to do so that people can wrap their heads around us. But luckily, I think
I was just going to say, I think that not to bring this into every conversation that I have these days, because I'm really trying to tone it down, but it is a symptom of patriarchy and colonization and capitalism that like you're one dimensional. You're a woman, so the only thing you can be is this one thing. And that's it. You can't get smart, you can't be a lover and a mother and sexual and, all the things that the whole spectrum of what a person can be, but we are only this little and there's only a little space at the table and it's this pyramid and you have to work your way up. Like, fuck that. No.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. No, it's like really interesting because I always think about how I never had a corporate job. And this is going to sound so entitled, but let me just be honest. I was like, I can't wear those clothes. But it wasn't because of the actual clothes or anything aesthetic. It's just like, I feel like I had to shed something about myself to walk into that environment, and the clothes were just the most obvious thing. But even when I talk to people, like my sisters have really kind of traditional jobs, they explain to me the way they have to behave in these spaces. And it feels like this alternate universe where you just kind of do it because everyone else is doing it and this is the way it's done, but nobody actually likes it, and parts of it actually don't really make sense, and parts of it don't even really work, aren't even efficient, but this is how we do it. And I think that that's like most things, you know what I mean? We're just like, well, I had to do it, so you have to do it. Like, it's not fair if I had to do it and you don't have to do it. But I feel like I'm always the one. Like, if I go into a place and the newest employee has to eat shit, and then I get promoted into that place where I'm the one who gets like the best like shifts and I make so much money, but I do half the work. I'm always like, no, we're not doing it this way anymore. I didn't like it when I was on that side. I actually am really uncomfortable on this side too. Like, I don't have time for this. So I think a lot about like culture and how culture is like the collective unconscious of whatever group or area or company you're in, and how by making the culture, by verbalizing it and identifying it and speaking about what you believe, you can actually start to see what doesn't make sense and try to change it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
I believe that 100%. It's so funny because there was so much that I learned from working in corporate America.
Yeah.
And I'm laughing because obviously at the time it was so soul sucking. Talk about a dark night of the soul. Work in a private equity firm for more than a year, you'll start to lose parts of yourself. But looking at it, and I worked in Manhattan, so it was like I was working with the 1% of the 1%, like billionaires, people with their own jets and shit like that. And the shit that they used to complain about, which is why I believe within every cell of my being that abundance and scarcity are a mindset. It doesn't actually matter how much money you have. I mean, yes, they say like, I think it's 50 or 75,000 that actually is like the minimum that humans need to feel safe and secure. But anything more than that actually doesn't matter, because these people were so cheap and they had such a poverty mindset most of the time. Like the shit that they used to complain about. I mean, I don't even want to share it. It's so embarrassing to these people. But going back to what you were saying before about like creativity, and this, to me, creativity is abundance. It's being able to know that you can create anything out of the universe, no matter the environment or situation that you're in. It's like creating something that's even obviously like in your environment, but you can even change your environment by your co-creation with a divine presence. Did any of that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Yeah, I think like what you're speaking to is this fine line that many people have a difficult time walking, which is like not denying that there's just systemic, basically fraud, like there's a systemic system. There's a system that is stacked against many, many people that benefits very, very few people. And it's like confusing to me that we even have to have this conversation, because I don't even know any of those people. Mm-hmm. So what are we sticking up for? But at the same time, your perception and what's actually happening, they intersect. They're both at play. And I think people try to talk about things like it's one or the other. Mm-hmm. They're like, oh, why are you talking about creating your reality? That's so messed up. That's just like denying all of the, the real truths. And then there's like the opposite, which is like really believing in like your ability to like manifest as a spiritual being, and then kind of denying all the other material things or the history of things or the things in our lineages that we carry in our blood from being oppressed or from oppressed people. And it's like, they're both true. Mm-hmm. But the one thing you probably, and we're all designed to probably make a change in a combination of those things, but I feel more strongly and more capable or more powerful changing my perception personally than I do going into systems and making change in a very direct way, which is not to say that we don't need to do that, but I might not be the one designed to do it exactly in that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and actually we just interviewed Dr. Rocio, who is a decolonial educator. And we talked a lot about this actually, and how spiritual people, if you chose to quote unquote wake up in this incarnation, you hold a responsibility to decolonize the past and also yourself, your mind, your actions. And that includes BIPOC people. But at the same time, you also have to create a better future. So it's not like, actually, it's very detrimental, she said, to just focus on decolonial work, because then you're just there all the time and it's very self-destructive, because we have to be able to hold nuance and different things at the same time. So while we're doing the unraveling and healing of the past, we also have to create our future. It's not one or the other. And I think last year, during all of the shitstorm that was 2020, I was sharing inspirational things just personally because I needed that. Because I needed to remember what we were fighting for. I needed to remember that there is life outside of all this trauma and suffering. And people really came at me in the comment section saying like, it's such a privilege to travel. And it's like, you're so privileged. And of course I am. Yeah. Of course I am. But I'm not going to stop hoping for the future and dreaming just because I'm also doing this healing work. So I agree with you.
That's so heavy because I think right now we're really, the most dangerous thing that I see that we are all part of is like this groupthink mentality. Mm-hmm. Like, I want to have friends who have different opinions than me. I want them to tell me when I'm wrong. I want new information that contradicts the information I heard yesterday, and to look at it and to be able to sort through it and parse through it. And something that's kind of dangerous in like the memification of education that's very, very deep and very, very complex, especially around like social political issues, is that you will hear people saying like, if you're not doing this, then you're doing it wrong. Or as soon as you hear this word, that's a red flag. Mm-hmm. But guess what? Like sometimes two people say the same exact thing, and the reason for doing it and why they're doing it and their background and their lived experience makes that post completely different. So like we do need to educate ourselves, but this idea that like we're trying to fit like years, hundreds of years worth of conversations and problems into these short comment sections and these little posts, like I think it's super, super dangerous because it kind of stops dialogue where there could be dialogue.
Yes.
And just creates judgment and separation where they could be curious. And actually you would probably be really open to if you really felt you hurt someone. You know what I mean?
Right.
But there's no room for you to say that. So it's kind of dangerous to me. Because I remember being the person who would read like, don't say this, don't say that. And see someone I loved and admired for years say this one sentence and be like, oh, should I just throw this person away? You know, are they bad? Should I forget about them? And I'm like, whoa, what's happening here? Whose thought is this? Because this is not my thought. Should my ears perk up? Should I be discerning? Yes. But I don't need to throw other people out because I read online that I should. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't do my homework.
The people having other belief systems that are not in alignment with your own has been really difficult for me in the last year and a half. Like, I have to just be honest, straightforward about that. Like, I thought I was more open-minded than I am open-minded in definitely different kind of things. But when it came to belief systems and what people believed in, who they were supporting, wow, like I definitely didn't see that one coming from me specifically.
Yeah, but I think it's like hard not to be reactive when people are speaking in these like really strict black and white polarities. And as someone who comes from a family that, I'll say this, most of my family did not vote the way I voted any of my life. I'll say that. I have a really big, curious, compassionate / angry, frustrated, disgusted, complicated reaction, because how I feel is that from listening to their media and listening to and looking at some of the information they see is that they're being actively brainwashed. Mm-hmm. They feel that same way about me, which is interesting because they don't even know what I'm listening to or reading. But it scares me because what I noticed with that particular kind of television is that it's literally like screaming at you at the top of their lungs. It's like getting your heart rate up and like causing you to panic and like indoctrinating you in this way. So whenever I feel like someone is trying to like, I don't know, like manipulate me emotionally and the information they're giving me is like not matching what they're saying, I always feel like a little like, what's going on here? So I know what you mean. Like, it's really hard to hear people say things. I want everyone to be able to express their truth. I do believe there's like an ability for multiple things to be true at the same time, but I also think there is a disgusting amount of misinformation,
Mhm.
purposeful manipulation, and just like a lack of care and awareness for other people.
Yes. And I have to say, maybe I'm not as compassionate as you, but I think it's fucking bullshit, honestly. Like
Yeah.
what I was kind of alluding to before about we were so close to so many things. I
Yeah.
felt like if, and I'm speaking specifically to America, the United States of America, that's where I'm from, that's where I was born. And I think that it's such an hyper individualized, capitalistic, racist society that if people cared more about the collective and other people, we would have like figured this whole thing out. A lot of different things, right?
Yeah.
We're not, because there's no common moral values, common moral themes to like move towards. It's like this person's idea, everybody has an opinion.
Yeah.
Which is like a beautiful thing about America. We have freedom of speech, but at the same time, so much harm has been done.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's like a big difference between people being curious about different things and like reading different studies and sharing. My sister works in a hospital and she'll tell me this study came out and that study came out, and they'll be different and I'll listen. There's a big difference between that and sort of like having your mind made up about something and yelling about it 24/7 and needing everybody to think what you think, which I think in terms of this like health crisis, there's been a lot of like, in the face of evidence X, Y, and Z, I still hold my opinion, and this idea or belief matters more to me than like learning more or caring about other people. So I think like the brainwashing that I see out in the world, I think my compassion is because it's for people that raised me,
Mm.
who I don't believe are bad people, who I'm honestly confounded and confused, and I see the way that they are not stupid people by other things they are able to do. And so my compassion just comes from that confusion of like, how does this happen? How are you a first generation immigrant family fighting for someone who hates you?
Mm-hmm.
They hate you. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, and it goes down to like peddling the mythologies of America and then defending them and making people identify with them.
Mm.
Right. So that way, if you tell people like Thanksgiving is a fucked up holiday, they feel personally offended.
Offended, yes.
Even though, were they there? Like, what is your stake in this? It's made up. Like,
Yes.
you know, so I think I understand the naive like nature of some of the people I know and love who believe it. And so it allows me to see this, be curious about why that's happening and if it's possible to change it. And I honestly, I think it's like nervous system entrainment that makes people fall for these things, which is why I love talking about nervous system work and grounding work and like nature and
Mhm.
communication skills and creativity, because people don't get so, they're more open.
Mhm.
And then I always just hope that translates into them being more discerning in these other areas of their life, because
Yeah.
it's important, you know, like,
Important.
yeah,
It's their own internalized supremacy.
yeah,
Because my mom also gets really offended when I talk about the genocide that is Thanksgiving. And I'm like, were you there? Were you there with the Pilgrims? Why are you so personally offended?
yeah, like why? Yeah, I think you're totally right, because it's like unconsciously we benefit from the system in some way, so we have to defend it, you know. And it's like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like in a lot of ways, this system, that I have many privileges that I'm aware of, but I almost feel lucky that I don't have too many.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't have a stake in this system. Like very little of what I have built my life out of comes from things that I don't agree with. So if certain things were to fall apart, if the stock market was to completely crash tomorrow, nothing would personally happen to me. But do you know what I mean? Like, I think that kind of trick people into becoming their livelihood becoming intertwined with this big giant thing we know nothing about, which is like our economy and the mythologies that hold it up.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Like,
well, a lot of these cultures really hold the US. I know Korea does this because they think of it as like the brave Americans that saved us, like the white savior. And I know when I was in the Philippines, they fucking love America.
oh my gosh,
You know,
yes.
the minute that they would know that I was American, it was like they rolled out the red carpet for me, and I was like, oh, it's because the white savior complex thing, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like you cannot say anything because, you know, the US quote unquote saved the Philippines from the Japanese, and the same with Korea a few times with colonization. And so anything I ever say about America, which I only say because I am American and I feel we could do so much better, is like a personal attack on the freedoms that they were given for their lives.
I am fairly certain that our textbooks in the Philippines come from like American institutions and American authorities, because like in the Philippines, the word for toothpaste is Colgate and the word for diapers is Pampers, because we were so corporatized and opened up as a market. There's more Starbucks in Manila than there are in New York City.
Wow.
It's a market, and it's seen as a sign of status among a country that's incredibly poor if you have American things. And so of course, like all of the Eurocentric beauty standards are reflected in who's on TV there.
Right.
And it's very subtle brainwashing that's been happening through my lineage and in my childhood since even before I was born, you know? And I think that during college, my parents threatened to deport me because I was like anti the war in Iraq. And they were like, you don't know what you have and how good you have it. And if you're so against this country, you should go somewhere else. And the thing is, again, like I know that the words they're speaking, it's like a malware in their brain, like you would have in a computer. I'm like, that's not your words, that's not your thoughts. It's not that I don't find that they're accountable and that they should have the power to understand what's real or not real, but I just recognize it, that it's not, I know where they got it. And it's insidious because if I counter with something I watched on PBS, my father will have read something that says PBS is a no good. I'm so serious. This is a real fight we got. I was like, who's sponsoring it? What are you talking about? They don't have any money.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's funny. But I just know that it's like a chess game that they give him the lines for. Like if she says this, you say that. Right. So I already know I'm arguing with basically some stranger who fed my dad these lines, you know? And so I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to fight with you. That's not where I am investing like my quantum energy. I'm gonna go over here and try to make change over here and stick up for things that are egregiously wrong, which in my family I sometimes have to do.
Right.
You know? And it's like, it's sad. Like, I don't want to have to do that. I'm not trying to be like the holiday buzzkill, but there's certain things I just cannot. My heart is too broken to hear said with such sort of like casual.
Right. I know. Well, it's interesting because tomorrow is our day of mourning, our problematic holiday that we've been celebrating here in the US. And I am that person that I have to speak out, because if I don't, when something is said that's inappropriate or racist or anything, I am then colluding with the spirit of supremacy, of colonization. And if I don't speak up, then I am like you know, like it starts with your family.
Yeah.
And I can't just sit there anymore. And I don't say it with as much anger in my voice, but I am that buzzkill. My family's always like, when did you get so serious? And I'm like, learning about history.
Well, that's the thing, is it has this emotional charge, right? That's what we've been talking about. And it's like, I'm not attacking you because some people made up this myth a long time ago. Excuse me. But, and I'm bringing it up. It's so strange that you identify with it. But I don't know, like, I think that what's so confusing about it for me is, like, with my family, like, this is the same thing that happened to us. Like, it's not that hard for us to relate to what happened to people here. And like, why does it feel irrelevant? Because you don't know them, or because it was a long time ago, or because, and I realized that when I talk to them about the Philippines and colonization, like you were saying before, if they can't even recognize it in their own lineage, in their own history, and have compassion. Like my mother says this thing sometimes where I think when she gets overwhelmed, she goes into full denial. She says, well, at least we were taught how to speak English. Thinking, well, now we got to make our way here, and we got to come here. And I'm like, we wouldn't have to come here. We wouldn't have to come here. And like, who knows what ancient language or ancient practice or mysticism was in our line? Who knows our relationship with our own cosmos? Who knows like what the characters and words and art would look like, or like what we'd be wearing if that hadn't happened? We can't change it, but I know you don't feel the pain of it because it's too much. And if you were to understand how much was lost by that, I don't think you could handle it. And I'm not here to to be the one to decide when you're going to understand that. But I am also not going to change who I am and what I see, if something needs to be said, because it's like when we all tell lies and let lies be told around us, that's when things get out of hand, right? So we do have to speak up sometimes. But I do think with them, their own grief is too deep for them to recognize it in others.
Wow, when you were just sharing that, like some kind of energetic pull was on the base of my spine, because when you don't have that connection, or you won't recognize that, it's such a deep, ungrounded feeling.
Yeah.
And that's so sad. Do you connect with your Filipino like heritage at all, or the cosmovision, or any of the cultural things?
I just found someone who's like, I think their handle is the Pinay Writer, but they've been writing all of this like amazing mythological stuff about the different constellations, and I'd never seen it before. They're from a different province than me, so it's probably not completely connected to my lineage, but there's a person on Instagram called JL Creator, and they taught me a lot about some of the ancestral wisdom of the Philippines. And actually there's a book called Babaylan, and it's so beautiful because they talk about the indigenous scientific perspective, which is all about this combination of like creativity and science and nature. But the main belief is that like everything is alive, everything is animate, right? It's like all earth-based magic, and like we all have it down every line. Like even if you're white, like if you go, there's earth-based magic because that's how we live. Like that's how we sustained ourselves, because we felt connected to land. So that root thing you were talking about makes so much sense to me, that sensation, because it's their disconnection from land. And my mom's favorite thing to do in the world is like arrange flowers and like pick fruit off trees. And my dad's favorite thing to do, I'm gonna cry, is be on like a farm where he can just be on land. And I think they had to believe that losing that was gonna be a good choice, a fair exchange. And I think the grief of that loss is beyond their capacity to feel. And so that is why I don't get super angry at them, because I am here because of them.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of my job, you know, like I do believe in sending healing backwards and forwards down our line. And so my job is, how can I not get in my own way with my own freedom of expression and creativity, because I have all this epigenetic imprinting that says erase yourself and your experience doesn't matter and your body doesn't matter and your feelings don't matter, as long as you look like you got from a worse place to a better place in life. That's all that matters. And there's like so much compassion needed, because we literally carry their memories in us.
No, thanks.
It's so funny. But I think that's why I like really do see the innocence and ability for people to change, while also understanding it's my deepest lesson to see things for what they are, not what they could be.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
and let people be a little more responsible for themselves. But yeah, I think like that grief of land loss in a weird way is something everyone goes through.
I was just going to say that. I was literally just going to say, I feel what you just described is how everybody feels. Because if you think about it, even white people have lost their own spiritual practices.
Yeah.
And I mean, sometimes I do have compassion. Sometimes I have compassion for white people, because they are so disconnected to their lineage, so disconnected to their ancestors and their land and their own cosmovisions, right? That
Yeah.
they cut themselves off from their roots, that of course they're going to feel lost. And with that feeling of loss, that's when they want to try to take from other people. That is the whole basis of colonization. And everything you said literally vibrated through the cells of my body. It was this like epigenetic, like,
I love the sound. That's my favorite part.
Well, I've been talking to my mom a lot recently, because I think I shared with you, we've been having a lot of tense moments together. And I was telling her that there's this word in Korean culture called Han, and and most people who are from Korean lineage know this word, because it is the intergenerational trauma and sadness that is passed on through generation. And it's something that nobody talks about. It's just something you carry. And I told her, fuck this, we're gonna break this. Like, we have to talk about it. We have to talk about all the trauma, and we have to break the cycle of repeating it through future generations, because it clearly is not working out for us.
Yeah, and like I can't believe there's a word for it. And yeah, it's not, that's so interesting to me, because you would almost imagine that because there's a word for it, it would be like in awareness to transmute or change it, but instead it's just this thing you carry, you know, like. But yeah, I'm with you. Like, I think it's really a hard time to be alive in some ways, just because it's so chaotic right now. But I also think it's so cool that we are learning about this like buried trauma, you know, that's been around for years. I think that the loss of land and kind of family lineage earth-based practices, I think, is why so many of us have a tendency to like roll our eyes when someone tries to like sell it back to us as like a $16 loaf of bread or whatever, because they're like, because it's like, I think I read somewhere that 95% of the fruit and vegetable species in America has been wiped out because of monocropping. And it's like, I have to buy back this non-poisoned bread. Like, I have to pay to not be poisoned. Like, are you serious? Like I don't understand this. And I think it's hard because we want that experience of that thing, but we want to do it the way we're supposed to do it, which is like tied to the earth,
right?
And like respect and love and veneration and like, and I think that like, you know, my biggest addiction I fall for is screen, and as an Aquarius rising and like technology and TV stuff. Not that a lot of beautiful stuff doesn't come from that for me, but I can overdo it. And I think it's designed that way
Totally.
because I think when you're in your body and attached to land, you're like, I'm going to fight for this, you know, like you can't not, because you just begin to like love it too much. And it just begins to like awaken parts of you that you've been burying, you know, and then it changes you. So I think they like, aside from making money off of us, this big tech or big pharma or big whatever media, I think they have like an agenda to cut us off from
Totally.
from land. And it's so simple. You know what I mean? Like it's not, it's like, it's hard for me to believe people that not everyone out there in the world, whatever they believe, could relate to that on some level,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but it's like, it's land.
Yeah. And also what you were saying before about creativity, I feel that social media and screens cut us off from that, because when we are opening our channel up to nature or beauty in different ways that aren't our screen, we are receptive vehicles and inputs in a different way than we are with like our screens, because they're already pre-programming us to see things in the way that they want us to see it, right?
Yeah.
So I was noticing, and that's why I took a break off of social media during Scorpio season, was because it was distorting my perception of my reality and also the collective reality. And the more I was in and hermit mode and just engaging in my community with the people all around me, people are actually doing what they are not supposed to be doing, but there's more people doing good than bad, actually.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we said this narrative that this world is, you know, gone to shit and it's not worth saving, but it is, because there's so many people who care.
Yeah, that's such a really important point. Like, it's interesting. I do think bad news gets good ratings, right? Like, it's
Totally.
addictive. It's
Yeah.
like pain addiction, you know? And like, it's like, I know what it feels like to kind of click on a screen like a lab rat and be like, I need to get that hit. They set it up like a casino. You know what I mean? It affects the brain the same way a casino does, in case anyone hasn't seen The Social Dilemma. It's just so terrifying. Have you seen that Netflix documentary?
I don't want to.
It's really terrifying, but really, really cool and important. I think it's just cool that people who worked in those companies were so brave to come out and be like, this is what we're doing and it's wrong and it's bad. But because our minds are electric and we have electromagnetic fields and our devices are electric and electromagnetic, I wonder how it's changing the synaptic flow of my mind when I hook into it, you know? And it probably is, brain imaging wise. So
it's hooking up yourself to the matrix like Neo. Like that shit is not like far down the line. It's happening already.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
it's like,
not to be very forceful with my words again, but I see these random people talking about, like, all of a sudden they are a epidemiologist by reading one article on fucking Facebook and making comments about the vaccine, and I'm like, bro, you opened up your phone with your face, okay? Like, the technology is already on you.
yeah. Yeah.
What are we talking about?
Yeah, it's interesting how people are so worried about. There's this book called The Black Swan. I didn't read it all the way through, but it talks about how people's concepts of things don't seem to translate across different areas of life or of thought, like what you're saying. Like, if you're so concerned about privacy here, how come you're not concerned about it there? And so then the question becomes, who's trying to make you think this thought? Why is this becoming such like a hot button issue?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think you're totally right on with that. Like, I do love that we all have a voice and that we all get to like try to understand the world and stop giving our authority away to other people to explain it to us. But I also think some humility around what you're sharing and where you got it from. Like, Facebook is really
Doesn't give you a PhD.
No. I am like, yeah, your FB PhD doesn't count. I'm really hoping that my vision of Facebook slowly dissolving out of being important is just like is true, because I think it really is a dangerous thing.
I totally broke up with it last year. And that whistleblower came out recently, that woman who said they made money off of fake news. Like, did anybody not read that or watch that?
I remember seeing that. I remember, like, here's the thing though, is like, do you notice like things kind of come out and then nothing changes?
Yes, all the time.
Yeah, like
All
it
the
really
time.
breaks my heart, because you know that person dedicated their life to that thing and it was a huge decision for them, and then you see that like without the backing of all of us or certain people in power, that nothing changes. But I do think something will shift, but I also think it's just going to require all of us to really think about what we care about and just be more intentional with the choices that we're making.
Yeah. I just want to ask maybe one last question. I know we're going way over time, but I literally could talk to you all day long. Is I want to personally like your creative process. So you wrote a book, or you're writing a book about creativity and opening up to the universe. Like, what is your personal process to get in that zone? Because I believe that's like channeling.
So my book is all about like channeling and what my personal definition of channeling is. I'm so glad you asked this question. But what I noticed for me is that, like, and it's interesting because I read human design charts, right? Like, my brain is always trying to, like, not my brain really, but something in my inspiration is always trying to feed me something. And it's always basically like, if you just sit down at the right time, you can chisel this out into form. So for me, a lot of the time, it's just about recognizing. I feel like this happens for you too. Like, it's time to sit and capture this thing. You know, I feel like you can't plan it, or for me, I can't plan it so much, but I'm just like, oh, okay, this is happening. One of the things that creates the most inspiration for me, actually, there's two things. One thing is being in the bathtub. And it's because I feel this permission to like focus my senses in one time and place. And I tend to feel like my higher knowing, or what really needs to come through, comes through when I'm in the bathtub. But the other thing that's interesting for me with writing, and we talked about this a little bit before we started talking, is like, I think that writing is sort of like me hearing myself, and my hands just need to like have a lot of freedom to just go wherever they want to go. And my mind kind of needs to be quiet in a way, which I think is the opposite of how I was trained. So with my creativity, I find that like the doing is in the doing instead of the planning and conceptualizing. And that's the place where I hit the most friction, is when I get too into conceptualizing and planning. Whereas I feel like things just kind of happen when I let them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel the same way. I learned from you that my top centers are all open. So I'm also an Aquarian moon. So and a Mercury in Pisces. And I feel like I just absorb. I'm just a huge sponge. I just like take it all in. And I need to feel incredibly inspired and in the moment. When the flow comes in is when I write. So like every day I just go by how I feel. I don't have a like a routine necessarily. It's very loose, because sometimes I feel like I can write all day long for like 8 hours straight, and then there'll be a week where I write nothing. And I'm like, hello.
Oh my gosh. No, for sure. There's like weeks where nothing is happening. And I'm like, I think of it as like I'm gestating something. It's like an egg, and it's like I have to leave it alone because it gets very quiet in these random moments. But you reminded me of the second thing, because this reminds me of you, is nature. I forgot, like,
Yeah.
the relaxation, soothing, but then also ability to kind of reach up into the higher realms, but then ground down into the earth. I find that like very inspiring. And I take a lot of videos of like scenes of nature most people would probably think are really boring, but I think they're really exciting.
Look at this leaf.
No, you're not that person.
I'll
Cannot
find a
go.
feather, and I'll
Oh
be
my
like,
God.
isn't this the most beautiful feather?
No, like going on a walk with me in a park is like the worst because I'm gonna stop you. But I think it's like the earth is creative. So when we're with it, it relaxes our nervous system. So I think the creative process is really actually about relaxing.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you just reminded me too that in order to feel creative, you have to feel grounded, safe, and secure, which is why I feel it's so important for people. You kind of touched on this, to do some kind of emotional nervous system regulation, because when we're in that fight or flight, when we're in the amygdala, like the fear response, of course you're not going to want to be creative because you're just trying to survive. But when you can like regulate and get into a safe space is when the creativity can flow again.
Yeah, you remind me of this quote my friend Shweta said one time, which she was like, we're talking about eating well, and she was like, of course you don't know what you want, you don't feel safe in your body. And she was talking about like how knowing what we want, like our safety is first. And I thought that was so like compassionate, because we can really beat ourselves up for like not being creative, when actually like we just need time to tend to like our baseline, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the chakra system and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where he took inspiration. Well, some people say might have taken altogether. But it's like you need to have that base first, and then comes like the creativity and the flow, and then comes the courage to share, right? And like open up your heart space, sharing with your voice what it is. And I think building upon each layer is part of the journey.
Yeah. And like, yeah, I've saw a lot of compassion for creative people, because it's like, I think the more something is really you, the scarier it is to put out. Like when it's like the real you.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, thank you for that question. Cause I think everyone is creative, and I think creativity is like super healing and restorative.
And it's so vulnerable, because when you truly stand in what you want to share too, and in the way that you want to express it, and it doesn't look like anybody else, and you're not doing it for validation, you share it and you're like, hi.
Ta-da! Anybody out there? Yeah, no, it's true. It's like you're debuting a part of yourself that's never been like fully out. So I think it's like, I don't know. I think one lucky thing I've always had is I've always been surrounded by really talented and creative people, you know? So shout out to y'all.
Well, was there anything that we didn't touch on, or that I didn't ask you, that you wanted to talk about? I feel like we really touched the gamut of topics here.
Yeah, I love this conversation. I mean, I guess with my book, The Universe is an Art Project, that should be ready for pre-order probably in about like 2 weeks from now. That's what I'm trying to hold myself to. And yeah, right now my focus is on human design and this offering I have called Sacred Heart to Hearts, which is like what it sounds like. It's just kind of making space for people to hear themselves and doing some energy work with them. But right now I'm just really enjoying teaching my human design and seeing what creativity wants to flow through next. And I'm so grateful to be here with you. It's been so fun just talking and laughing and crying.
All of the emotions.
So thank you.
Xenia is an amazing human design reader. She really goes through each of the things, because I had like 1,000 questions, and she really took the time to explain to me, because it is based of astrology, but it is a different system that I just like, oh, bleh. It just looked like weird lines and things. I was like, what is this? So she she does an amazing job of explaining it and really getting you to understand your own chart. And whenever you went through each of the sections, I was like, this makes so much sense. And now only if I can like bring this around with me and be like, see, this is why I am the way I am. And you just have to love me for how I am. So please get a reading with her. And thank you so much, Xenia. You are such a magical unicorn. I'm so glad and thankful to whoever brought us together. Was it Instagram? I think maybe
it was Miriam. It was Miriam.
Yeah. Listen, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was Miriam. But yeah, super grateful to be in your unicorn pod. Thanks for having me.